Hello, my name is Anthony Griggs of Six Hat Solutions. I'm going to give a very brief overview of Microsoft Access 2013 Pivot Table Alternatives. Now, as you probably know if you're watching this video, Microsoft has deprecated pivot tables in their 2013 release. This is a walkthrough of a couple alternative solutions that may fill this gap. Now, when setting up this demonstration, I've used a copy of the Northwind sample database, which is one that most of you will be familiar with, so it'll be easier to follow along. Now, I currently have both versions of Microsoft Access 2010 and 2013 installed on my machine. So to begin this demonstration, I'm going to start off by creating a simple pivot table in my 2010 version. Now, in looking at this demonstration, you can see that I've already linked my SQL Server Northwind database to this Access database file. I've also built a standard orders query that has joins to the order detail, customers, shipper, and products table. So let's go ahead and run this and get a very brief view of the data. As you can see, it's all standard: order ID, order date, ship via, product name, unit price, quantity, extended price, etc. on down the line. So hopefully that gives you a good idea to help you visualize the data that we're working with. So let's go ahead and take this query and turn it into a pivot table. And there we have it, our very flexible and powerful pivot table. So I'm going to go ahead and show the field list so we can begin work. The first thing I'm going to do is take our customers and drag the customers over to the rows section so we can get a breakdown of all the customers. Next, I'm going to drag the extended price over to the totals drop, which will give us a sum or a total of all products sold per customer. Now, for those of you familiar with pivot tables, I'm sure you've already noticed that I've hidden all the details. I've done this just to keep a simplified view of the data. And the very last thing I'm going to do to our pivot table is go ahead and add the product name to the column section so we can get a sales per product breakdown, again, per customer. And there we have it. Our demo pivot table consists of sales totals per product for each given customer. So now, of course, this was our solution for Microsoft Access 2010 and earlier, but as earlier mentioned, beginning in 2013, this was no longer available. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is look at a couple of alternatives. So the first alternative that we're going to look at today is CrossTab queries. Now, realistically, this isn't really an alternative to the pivot table because all CrossTab queries produce is static views of pre-configured data. But with CrossTab queries, you can produce the same end result, and Microsoft Access 2013 still has CrossTab queries available. So in this demonstration, I basically used the same query that I went ahead and converted into a CrossTab query, and I've used the same three fields that I used in our earlier pivot table example. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we're looking at. So when looking at this, we can see that it produces the same end results, but with the CrossTab query, we lose the flexibility with the pivot table, and that we can no longer drag and drop our fields in the columns or rows or wherever we'd like them. Now, even though you lose a big advantage in not having that flexibility, CrossTab queries might be a great alternative because your pivot tables can quickly be converted to CrossTab queries, and you completely remain within the Microsoft Access environment. Also, CrossTab queries have the potential to be extended by a developer through Microsoft Access forms. A solution like this could return some, if not all, of the flexibility held within the pivot tables. The next demonstration that I'm going to show today is one that Microsoft recommends as a replacement for the Access pivot table, and that is going into Excel and using Excel pivot tables and charts. Now for this example, I created a query which I then scripted into a view of our Northwind database. I used all the same fields, so we will be able to replicate our earlier created pivot table exactly. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we're looking at. So as mentioned earlier, I went ahead and took this query and I turned it into a view, so that way the Excel file can go ahead and access it directly from the SQL Server. And here within our Excel pivot table, I've already created and linked our SQL Server to this file. And as you can see, we have all of the available fields right here in the fields column to our right. So even though this leaves the Microsoft Access environment, we regain all of the flexibility previously held within our Microsoft Access pivot table. Admittedly, the IDE is a little bit different and it'll take a little bit of working with it to get familiar with it, but we regain a lot of that flexibility as earlier mentioned. And as you can see, we have the exact same pivot table as we did in Microsoft Access, with the added advantage of it being within Microsoft Excel, which is a very powerful unit in itself. So in conclusion, these are two very brief alternatives. I'm sure you can find many more, especially when you consider all the third-party tools available. But hopefully this has opened up the doorway for you to consider possible alternatives when dealing with Microsoft Access pivot tables. My name is Anthony Griggs. If you'd like to know more about me or my company, you can contact me at www.sixhatsolutions.com.